Original Voices of Wartime Ukraine. Presented by Ukrainian Crisis Media Center.
We have to help each other. The story of a woman in Kherson who survived the occupation and continues to help under fire. Written by Yevgenia Virlich.
Russian aggression has a disproportionate impact on Ukraine's most vulnerable citizens. People who struggled even before the war have overcome difficulties that the civilized world learns about only in history books. War is a trying time for all families, but what is it like to have a disabled child? Public organizations and individual volunteers act as true heroes. Olha Tsilynko survived the occupation of Kherson and is still living in the city under fire. She cares for over 24 families with disabled children. The Sofia Family Rehabilitation Center, led by Olha, has been active for 15 years, assisting families with children who have central nervous system disorders. Olha continues to support her fellow Ukrainians today, despite around-the-clock bombardment.
During the last few years, prior to the full-scale war, the families of the NGO Sofia Family Rehabilitation Center were able to take a short vacation and receive rehabilitation at the sea in Kherson. This was done at the expense of the city budget. So children whose families do not have enough money for a vacation and rehabilitation could travel to the Black Sea coast every year to recuperate and be rehabilitated. With the occupation of Kherson in 2022, the rehabilitation of disabled children, as well as an array of other activities for them, were halted. However, Olha couldn't afford to put her families on hold. She claims they are hers because since joining the organization, the families have truly become one family, and friend or foe identification has become important during the occupation and Russian shelling that has been ongoing since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Olha refers to her family members as Sofikas.
During the occupation, it was important for me that no one went to the Russians for a humanitarian aid.
At the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Kherson Oblast was one of the areas where the invaders advanced the most quickly. Finally, almost the entire region, including the regional center, was occupied. The panic in Kherson was similar to that in other areas, with drugs disappearing from pharmacy shelves and food disappearing from grocery store shelves. It was difficult to withdraw cash from ATMs. As the occupation progressed, it became more difficult not only to obtain cash, but also to pay by card. At some point, the Russians began to control the use of terminals and actively seized them, which they referred to as actual theft. During the occupation, it was important for me that no one went to the Russians for humanitarian aid, says Olha Tsilynko. Let's be honest. In the majority of my families, mothers raise children on their own, without fathers. Unfortunately, this is the reality. A mother raising a disabled child cannot work full-time. The occupation of Kherson has also halted normal and full-fledged work processes. Many people have lost their jobs and earnings. My mothers were on the verge of enduring. Additionally, alimony was not transferred. This is probably the most surprising aspect of the occupation. Mothers of disabled children did not receive alimony for nearly a year after it began. How were they supposed to live? Olha emphasized that she was fully aware that the occupation would begin with the Russians distributing humanitarian aid and filming it for propaganda. Olha Tsilynko, a history graduate and long-term volunteer, recalls exactly what happened in Crimea and the occupied communities of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in 2014. After the occupation began, she continued to appeal to caring individuals on social media for financial assistance. The money was used to purchase food and medications. Children with disabilities require medications on a regular basis to maintain vital functions. Pharmacies closed quickly, and the almost forgotten Soviet word "get" reappeared in everyday life, according to the woman. Medicines could be ordered and paid for by familiar volunteers, some of whom were in the Ukrainian government-controlled area. and they attempted to take them to Kherson at the expense of their lives. The Russians did not always allow them through. There were instances where volunteers were apprehended. Some were killed by Russians at checkpoints. Sometimes cargo was just stolen. It was a terrifying time. Not all medications could be found. The deoccupation of Kherson saved a lot. One of the first things we did was to buy and deliver the medicines that the children needed so much, according to Olha. None of the families went to get Russian humanitarian aid.
Shelling and blowing up the Kakhovka hydropower plant. Whatever happens, at least there's no Russians.
Olha Tsilynko appears in numerous photographs that circulated globally during the early days of Kherson's liberation in November 2022. The families she cares for celebrated their freedom from Russian occupation, having endured the shelling together. Later, they faced yet another crisis when Russian forces destroyed the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant, another disaster they survived together. Olha's house was near the river, so water began flooding it within hours after the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant exploded. The only thing separating us from the river was the railway tracks, which sit just a bit higher than the river level, she recalls. The water wasn't supposed to reach them, and the rails remained dry. But beneath the tracks were storm drains, left open. In just 15 minutes, the current surged 40 centimeters. The speed was incredibly high, Olha says. On that day, June 6, 2023, at 7 a.m., when people realized the water was rushing towards them, they began calling emergency services, but they could do little to assist. Throughout the occupation, the Russians stole nearly all of the equipment. Olha's house is currently unlivable. After the Russians blew up the Kakhovka HPP, a large amount of silt, dirt, unexploded mines, and other debris flowed down with the water. She didn't even have time to take a photo right away, but her friends later reminded her that she would need it for additional evidence and potential compensation. I hardly had time to take anything away. We were busy helping elderly neighbors and rescuing animals. A large number of documents and important items were destroyed. Our life before June 6, 2023 was erased by the Russians, but we have begun to live again. The entire town has come back to life. Olha lived on the NGO's premises for a while, with her daughter, son, and animals. In fact, the center, as the Sofikas referred to it, became a true salvation. Volunteer friends provided new sets of linen so that the children could sleep comfortably. Caring people raised funds to help a volunteer who had saved 3 dozen families throughout the occupation and now needed assistance herself. The shock and despair were awful, but whatever happens, there are no Russians, emphasizes Olha Tsilynko.
We are waiting for our sea.
After an interruption of 2 years, the Sofia Center's families were once again able to provide a short rehabilitative vacation to disabled children. For the first time, it was not at sea, but in a new location, the Ternopil region. This is a real breath of fresh air for families, literally and figuratively, says Olha Tsilynko. After the terrible realities of round-the-clock shelling, there is a bit of silence in the comfort of the trees, with rehabilitation exercises and classes with a psychologist. It is very important for our children. Of course, we are waiting for our sea, the deoccupation of the Kherson Oblast, but this rehabilitation was also very important to us. Olha continues helping families. They still have weekly sessions with a psychologist. Volunteers help with money for food. Olha continues buying dairy products, which are necessary for sick children. If there is an opportunity to buy seasonal fruit, she also takes advantage of it. Recently, a farmer from the Bereslav district, Anatoly Polyvyany, made a gift for the children. Olha helped him with planting material, and Anatoly thanked her with a generous harvest of vegetables. And all this under round-the-clock Russian shelling, which doesn't seem to stop, not even for a moment. We delivered aid for our military, says Olha. We need to help those who liberated us and are now defending us against the Russians. On our way, we stopped at Anatoly's. It was heartbreaking to see how the Russians ravaged these incredible communities in the Kherson region. Devastated, broken villages. Life continues in larger villages, but in smaller ones, everything is very sad. They destroyed an entire layer of our culture by uprooting it. There is little agriculture machinery, but the fields are cultivated, a unique Ukrainian feature. Our farmers will be able to cultivate the land anywhere, even without machinery. The heat and lack of irrigation made the sunflowers die at the Hedis stage. The reservoirs that we saw in November have either disappeared or shrunk beyond recognition. Today, Russian reconnaissance drones armed with explosives have reached Kherson's center. They are literally hunting for people. They are firing almost every type of weapon they have at us. Every day, there are reports of injuries and death. However, the city continues to exist. Everyone who stays in Kherson is in fact a volunteer. We unite, help each other, know who is a friend and who is a foe. That's how we survived. And that's how we will continue to live, says Olha.
The project is supported by the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine. The views of the authors do not necessarily reflect the official position of the U.S. government.